I'm really happy to learn and fully support the Intendured University organized this academic conference on the theme of slavery and indentured labor at this special moment and in this special year. Especially, this conference has dedicated a panel on the important role played by the Chinese indentured laborers in the history of Suriname. So first of all, I would like to extend our warm congratulations and all the best wishes to the conference. The Chinese laborers came to Suriname 170 years ago. They were trailblazers of hard work, traveled across the vast ocean to Suriname, overcome fatigue and isolation of a long journey to establish themselves in this beautiful land, allowing the entire Chinese community to flourish and become an integral part of Suriname's ethnic diversity. The system of slavery and indentured labor is now far removed from history as a dark torrent, but the indomitable spirit of resistance, the quality of hard work and courageous struggle, the sense of solidarity with one's neighbors have all been left. It shaped the civic spirit of Suriname today. The Chinese indentured laborers were also messengers of cultural exchange. They brought the civilization of the Far East to this Western country, and the cultural exchange between East and West slowly began. Each civilization is rooted in its own soil of existence, bringing together the extraordinary wisdom and spiritual pursuit of a nation and a people. Each civilization is the crystallization of labor and wisdom. Each civilization is unique. During the historical changes in Suriname, Indians, Creoles, Javanese, Jungle Blacks, Maroons, and the Chinese have brought different civilizations, and the immigrants of various ethnicities with different skin colors and cultural backgrounds have formed a colorful cultural mosaic. We look forward to the Chinese study scholars present at this conference to bring back to life the real history of indentured labor, to give us a rational insight beyond our emotion feelings, and to suggest new ways of thinking about positioning and development of the Chinese community in Surinamese society today. The development of a civilization can only be achieved through openness and tolerance. Each civilization has its own unique charm and profound heritage, and is a spiritual treasure for humanity. It is important for different civilizations to complement each other's strengths and make progress together, so that the exchange of civilizations can become a driving force for the progress of a human society and a bond for maintaining world peace. Mr. President, dear guests, as we approach to the 170th anniversary of the Chinese settlement in Suriname, we are keen to see all sectors of Surinamese society remembering the story of the Chinese and listening to the voice of the Chinese nation. We hope that the history of slavery and indentured labor will never be lost in the torrent of history, and that friends of both ethnic groups in Suriname will always be able to look back on the past and learn from it. We believe that the development of Suriname is still on the way, and that the future and destiny of the Surinamese people will certainly be full of light and hope. China is always ready to work with the international community to promote mutual respect and harmonious coexistence among civilizations, so that mutual learning and appreciations of civilizations can become a positive force in promoting the building of a community of human destiny, sharing opportunities for development, addressing common challenges, and building a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now invite the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Mr. Henk van der Schoen, to deliver his speech.
Thank you, Mrs. Chinfu. Mr. President, all participants, with respect to all protocol rules, it's my pleasure to be here today at the opening of the seminar on legacy of slavery and indentured labor and its impact on present societies. The past that we are looking at this moment is sometimes inconvenient, but it is inescapable. And coming to terms with this past is often a personal struggle, which is difficult sometimes. This was manifest on the 19th of December last year, when our Prime Minister, Mr. Mark Rutte, expressed a speech in which he presented the apologies on behalf of the Dutch government for the role of the Netherlands in the history of slavery. Please allow me to quote something from that speech, which expresses the personal struggle that Prime Minister Mark Rutte went through. I start my quotation now. For a long time, I thought that we could not easily take meaningful responsibility for something that happened so long ago. Something that none of us experienced firsthand. For a long time, I thought that the Netherlands' role in slavery was a thing of the past. Something we had put behind us. But I was wrong. Centuries of oppression and exploitation still have an effect to this very day, in racist stereotypes, for example, in discriminatory patterns of exclusion, in social inequality. And to break those patterns, we also have to face up to the past, openly and honestly. A past that we share with other people and other countries, and that has forged a special connection between our societies for all time. It is true that no one alive now is personally to blame for slavery, but it is also true that the Dutch state, in all its manifestations through history, bears responsibility for the terrible suffering inflicted on enslaved people and their descendants. So we cannot ignore the effects of the past on the present. Three key words are acknowledgement, apology, and recovery. And it begins with acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of the terrible suffering inflicted on generations of enslaved people. Acknowledgement and rehabilitation of all those who put up resistance, like the courageous Maroons of Suriname. Again, Mr. Rutte, the dialogue on the history of slavery should be held as broadly as possible, not only in the Netherlands, but also and especially in the places where it happened, with everyone who is involved or feels involved. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is precisely what this conference is all about. And it may be inconvenient to face the past, but it is a process that we have to go through. And I wish all participants in this conference the best of luck and the best of success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Henk van der Swart, Ambassador of the Republic of, apologies, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. My apologies. So we are now honored to have amidst us the President of the Republic of Suriname, His Excellency Mr. Chandrika Prasad Santokhi. May I now invite you to deliver your presentation.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony. Good morning, all of you, Ministers, Deputy Speaker of the House, Ambassadors, members, of course, diplomatic, President Board members of the University, Chairperson, members of the organizing committee, distinguished guests from a participant from Suriname, but also our guests from abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. Chair, Mr. Maurus Hassan Khan, I listened to you. And you said you don't have money. But I recognize with honor that you have Koni. And if you have Koni, there is no retirement. So with this hopefully understood message, I hope that we can count on your contribution, your experience, your knowledge, together with all your colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are here to start a conference for a commemoration of 4 important events in the history of Suriname. And that is the 170th anniversary of the Chinese immigration, 170th anniversary of the Portuguese immigration. We almost forget this group. But also 160th anniversary of the abolition of slavery, and 150th anniversary of the immigration of East Indians to Suriname. And there will be more events, because this year we will celebrate the anniversary of all the ethnical groups in Suriname in unity. And that we'll do from the last week of May, we started already, till the last week of October. And that is what our intention is as government and community, to strengthen the unity, to strengthen, as we call it in Suriname, the Brumchijari, and to strengthen also the values and the norms in our community. All these events had to do with our colonial past, which has still a strong impact in the present society. Slavery and indenture were 2 important aspects of colonialism, together with the suppression of the indigenous people in every part of the world. That is the reason why this conference has been called a global conference on slavery, indentured labor, and their impact on present societies. we as government are very glad with the initiative of the Intendured University to bring scholars from all over the world together to discuss aspects of themes and topics related to colonialism, slavery, and indentured labor. Suriname, yes, is a small country in the world, but our history has been a part of world history. And I appreciate the participation of scholars from all over the world, beginning with our own country, Suriname, and its neighboring countries, the Americas, Europe, Africa, India, China, Mauritius, South Africa, and even from far Australia and Fiji. I welcome you all in Suriname, and I welcome you all at this conference. I congratulate also the organizers with this initiative, and I hope that the scholars from different parts of the world will not only share their experiences and thoughts, but will establish new relations or will foster existing relations. And I'm very content with the idea that research papers will be selected to make publications. One of the purposes with the idea that research papers will be selected to make publications, and one of the purpose of the conference is to discuss new approaches and theories, and also to stimulate comparative research. And I'm very pleased, Mr. Maurus Hassan Khan, to notice that a lot of those papers were selected for publication, and I'm fully convinced that during this conference other papers will be selected for publication, and that's an indication of the high quality of this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, with the intention and the goals of this conference, that we have to achieve the goals together, nationally as well as internationally. Only then we'll be able to solve problems of the present day world. Because most of them are transnational, for which collaboration between institutes and scholars from different countries is essential. I do hope that this conference will stimulate more research on colonialism, slavery, and indentured labor, not only about what had happened in the past, but especially to study the impact of the past on the present and the future. I have heard this from the previous conference held in 2018. 6 publications have been produced, and that more are in the making. And I do hope that this conference will be a stimulus to produce more and good quality research papers. We as government will support and stimulate this initiative, and university and organizing committee, you can count on the support of my government. With these words, I declare this conference to be opened, and I wish you successful and fruitful deliberations, and I'm looking forward to the outcome of all these discussions and deliberations. Success with your conference, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your speech. As the President just mentioned, we have to achieve our goals, national and internationally, together. And in this context, I want to invite Ms. Sigmund Staphorst to deliver her speech, her keynote speech, with the theme, Creation of a Nation, Challenging the Nation-Building Legacy of Colonialism. Let me read her bio, her short bio for you and share it with you. Who is Ms. Sigmund Staphorst? She is a professional in social transformation and gender affairs who earned several awards from the government of Suriname, as well as private sector institutions for her contribution to community-based development programs and to national gender equality projects, policies, and legislations. She was actively involved at the management level of the Ministry of Social Welfare and Foreign Affairs for 25 years. At the NGO level, she has played an active role in the development and strengthening of national civil society platforms, like the National Platform for NGOs, for Women NGOs, and Hinterland NGOs. As the Managing Director of the National Women's Organization, NVB, she formulated and supervised many successful women and development programs with components of gender, legal rights, entrepreneurship, and community development. Currently, she is president of NACS, and NACS is UNESCO accredited, and she is very committed to strengthening self-awareness and preserving cultural heritage of Afro-Surinamese people, consequently reaching out to other ethnic groups and culture groups through the Alakondre approach. Alakondre is a fusion of all Surinamese ethnic cultural expression. And last but not least, and that's important also, she published widely on above topics of interest. May I have applause for Ms. Sigmund Staphorst.
Good morning, President, Minister of Education, and all other protocols observed. Also this one. I will speak on the creation of a multi-ethnic nation, and the subtitle is Challenging the Nation-Building Legacy of Colonialism. Suriname, like many other countries in the Caribbean, with a colonial history, has to deal with the legacy of colonialism at many levels. One important aspect which impacts our society very deep, or I have to say very deeply, is the multi-ethnic population deliberately established by the colonial powers to foster their economic interest. This colonial legacy is challenging us, challenging Suriname politicians, but also the Suriname population in the post-colonial period. And it is challenging us to implement successful nation creation policies. That means to develop clear-cut strategies to acknowledge the ethnic segments, creating a shared nationhood and a mutual loyalty. This challenge of Suriname to successfully create a nation was and is still prompted by another colonial legacy. It is the legacy of the distinct policies implemented by the colonial power during their colonial governing period imposing their concepts of civilization based upon divide and rule, and stimulating rivalry and animosity between ethnic groups. In doing so, creating an antagonistic atmosphere which negatively impacts on the creation of mutual loyalty and shared foundations of nationhood. This is the first challenge I acknowledge. And then there is another challenge, and that one is related to establishing a Surinamese nation, and it was and is still triggered by the fact that European nation building since the 19th century relied on a state-controlled education to instill in citizens a common language, shared identity, and loyalty to the regime. This strategy of nation building was adopted by the states, not only in Europe, but all over the world, including ex-colonial states like Suriname. Thus, the Surinamese political elite, who gained political power in the 20th century around 1949, embraced this strategy of Europe. And European nation building. And among that, introducing the Dutch language as the official Surinamese language, along with a plural society as the most important concept of building the Surinamese nation. This nation-building strategy resulted in the formation of Surinamese political parties along ethnic lines. And that was since Suriname gained semi-autonomy in the 1940s. Embracing an ethnic political party has since then been the most important way for Surinamese citizens to meaningful socio-economic progress. As a result, ethnic groups which were not successful in forming ethnic political parties and so gained political power were marginalized for decades. This development, invoked by colonial power policies, adds to the challenges of creating a Surinamese nation. And then another aspect of colonial power legacy, which impacts the creation of a Surinamese nation, is linked to the national development strategy, centered around the exploitation of natural resources embraced by political parties in Suriname since our independence. These strategies have not proved to have an impact on evenly distribution of national incomes among the population, but on the contrary, created an ever-growing gap between rich and poor in our country. Moreover, a hierarchy has emerged, placing some ethnic groups in a marginalized, inferior position vis-a-vis the more urbanized groups. Maroon and Amerindian groups living in the hinterland are among the poorest of our Surinamese society, more often not fully included as part of the Surinamese nation, more often voicing their concerns of exclusion around civil rights and human rights issues. And also, they keep calling for recognition of their collective rights. Thus, Suriname is faced with huge challenges put there for us by colonial powers. And taking these legacies of colonial power into account, we have to take these legacies into account when moving from a multi-ethnic society into a Surinamese society, a Surinamese nation. In taking up these challenges, we have to consider the strategies to be used in this national change process. Nation-building strategies used by the colonial powers and focusing on initiatives of the Surinamese states. Or nation creation strategies focusing on the initiatives of civil society in Suriname. So we have to choose between two strategies, nation building strategies or nation creation strategies. Both strategies have been carefully explained by Dr. Jack Menke in his publication Nation Building or Nation Creation in Suriname, published by the SWE Foundation in 2008. In explaining the nation-building process, Dr. Menke observed that these nation-building strategies, which have been used systematically in ex-colonies, show the following characteristics. 1, they are imposed by and adopted from the colonial state and based on the ideals of unified culture and development. Second, nation building is imposed from above to form a unified culture. Third characteristic of nation building strategies is they are based on the European ideals of culture and economic development. Nation creation strategies, on the other hand, are based on non-Western ideals of culture and development. They are more in line with the inter-ethnic aspirations of the population, and they are based on mutual respect, mutual solidarity, instead of animosity through political parties or government coalitions. Through the decades, we have learned that Suriname is not alone in this struggle to develop nation creation policies and challenging the colonial-induced dominance of ethnical political party practices. Many ex-colonial states are faced with the same challenges. The same is true, for instance, for ex-colonies in the Caribbean. And I mentioned Guyana because I found a very good statement in the Guyanese Chronicle of November 2003. And I quote, "One is hesitant to conclude that we have failed to rise to the challenges of a multi-ethnic society, that we do not have the intelligence, the discipline, and the stamina to develop our country, that we are doomed to live and die in the foothills of life, petty minds and petty squabbles. Yet we are the visionaries. Yet, where are the visionaries? Where are the Mandelas? Where are the statesmen who will strike out boldly, resolutely, and irrevocably beyond the confines of ethnicity? Who, instead of seeking to exploit fears, will seek to soothe them? Who, instead of harboring prejudices, will seek to understand them? Who, instead of trying to score cheap points, will look for the broader picture? Who will burn their ethnic bridges fearlessly and finally step bravely forward into the unknown and hoping that a new path of principle and progress can be found there?" End of quote. This was in Guyana Chronicle 2003, November 2003. guests of the conference participants. It is true that it's not easy to deal firmly with the colonial heritage in all its forms. It is also true that the colonial powers destroyed the cultural heritage of our own ancestors, taking away our identity, influence our view on national development outlook. It is true that colonial heritage, after so many decades, still keep our nation divided through ethnically based politics, creating fear and animosity. It is true that ethnic political parties have no real understanding of the colonial legacy and therefore no plan to overcome it, and thus cannot take initiatives for inter-ethnic solidarity for meaningful nation creation. We already observe some meaningful and encouraging good practices of interculturalism at the grassroots and civil society level. I mention initiatives of the cultural organization NACS. In the sphere of the so-called Ala Congres, that means Ala Congres means all ethnicities. In the sphere of the Ala Congres fusion at the level of drums, at the level of dance, the Ala Congres dance, at the level of awareness, what we call Ala Congres Tori, where children are learning from each other's culture through storytelling. NACS has also introduced the interculturalism approach in the NACS Icons Calendar project, which portrays Surinamese heroes of all ethnic groups. At the level of visual arts, the intercultural, inter-ethnic approach has already pronounced itself through a series of Ala Congres arts exhibitions organized by the Reditex art galleries, also including artists from abroad in this multi-ethnic thinking. Pagwa and Diwali celebrations of the Hindustani ethnic group have through the years become real inter-ethnic celebrations. And let's not forget the number of inter-ethnic marriages which show an encouraging upward trend. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that it's time to think out of the box. Not only rely on the dynamic of our political leaders to effectively cross the ethnic barriers. Now it's time to realize our blurred perception and start thinking out of this box. We cannot wait for the rise of dynamic political leaders still to be born to effectively cross the ethnic barriers. Now it's time to rely on the civil society to systematically accept the challenges of new process of nation creation, choosing carefully for new political principles and patterns. A new nation which is no longer a copy of the ideas and vision of the colonizers. A new nation which strengthens ethnicity and creates new visions on economic and cultural development based on social equity and the trust of all ethnic groups. I firmly believe that the civil society, with conscious and determined self-developed policy, patience and perseverance, will be able to turn the heritage of the colonizers into a truly inter-ethnic and democratic nation. I thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sigmund Staphorst, for delivering your speech. Indeed, we have to collaborate to create this new nation. And I'm also a champion of this, so you have one person already. Okay, thank you again. So thinking out of the box, due to the other commitments and obligation of the President of the Republic Suriname, we will now move the handing over of the publication to the Minister of Education, Culture and Science, Mr. Henry Ori, now, and afterwards we will ask Mr. or Dr. Brinsley Sumaru to deliver his presentation. Mr. Chair, Dr. Morris Hassan Khan, and Minister Ori, may I invite you to come here to the podium.
Thank you very much. First, I want to explain our program has to be changed because of the visit, the state visit of the President of India. So the President has to leave within 2 minutes from now on, and we thought it is better that during his presence, we give the books, the products, the first 3 projects of the last conference. 3 are on their way. We will get them this afternoon. Minister, with very much pleasure, I want to hand you 3 of the publications. One is on women, gender, and the legacy of slavery. Second is collective memory, identity, and the legacies of slavery and indenture. And the last one is social aspects of health, medicine, and disease in the colonial and post-colonial era. With pleasure, on behalf of the whole organization, I give it to you, and maybe you say only a few words, because the President has to leave.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan Khan. We sure should need to put this book, the content of this book into the society and spread the story among young people and the society, and it's necessary to teach also from the content at our university. And thank you very much. You enrich the country with writing these things and editing these books for the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will continue, but first we will give opportunity to the President to leave us, and then we will go further.
All the best success with your partner. God bless you.
We will not have the break. We will just have now the speech of Professor Sumaru.
Thank you for your understanding. We will now start with the second keynote speaker, delivered by Dr. Brinsley Sumaru. And the theme of this presentation is the new interlopers, Chinese, Japanese, Indian immigrants to the Caribbean. Who is Dr. Brinsley Sumaru? Professor Brinsley Sumaru is a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. He graduated from Delhi University, India, and London University, England. Since his return to the Caribbean, he taught at the University of the West Indies, Trinidad, and at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. From 2001 to 2010, he chaired the committee which established a Sugar Heritage Museum and Archive at Bridgen Castle, an old sugar estate in central Trinidad. He was also active in national politics as leader of the opposition in the Senate from 1981 to 1986, and as Minister of Government from 1986 to 1991. As researcher, he has focused on Caribbean labor history and on the Indian diaspora. Among his publications are 2 pioneering publications on the Indian diaspora, namely Across Dark Waters, co-edited by David Dean, and India in the Caribbean also. In 2003, he published a pictorial volume on the sugar industry, Glimpses of the Sugar Industry, and in 2015, he published The Price of Conscience, Howard Nakifel, and Labor Unrest in the British Caribbean. Last but not least, in 2022, he published Adrian Cola Rinci, The Life and Times of an Indo-Caribbean Progressive. His forthcoming publication is The City Around the Hills, the San Fernando Story. This is an account of the growth of Trinidad Second City. Please, may I have applause for Professor Brinsley Sumaro.
Dhanyawad, Madam Chair, and I'm quite pleased that you pronounce my name correctly. That is the correct Hindi pronunciation of someone who was born on Monday, Somaru. Baino, Bhayo, Mitro, Sab koi, Namaskar, Alhamdulillah. I greet you in Hindi in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of East Indian arrivals in Suriname, from which we've attended some really very good sessions over the last few nights. So I want us to think today about the 133rd anniversary of the arrival of Javanese in Suriname. The 150th anniversary of East Indian migration, the 160th anniversary of the abolition of slavery, the 170th anniversary of Portuguese immigration, and the 170th anniversary of Chinese immigration to the Caribbean. So all of these people came together over all of these years to create the modern Caribbean. And today's session is a once-in-a-lifetime session. There never again will be an occasion like this, with the same people, with the same program. So that this is a once-in-a-lifetime occasion, and therefore we must dearly treasure these moments. As the Chinese ambassador told us just a few moments ago, we must never let occasions like these be lost in the torrents of history. And in a little while, I shall be making some particular comments on the tremendous contribution that the Chinese have made to Caribbean civilization. My presentation, the paper that I have written on this topic is a long paper with a lot of statistical information and detailed research footnotes. So I would ask you to read it at your own convenience. But what I will do now, I will try to give you a summary of this paper that I am presenting in this conference. So first of all, I would like to talk about the Dutch, the importance of the Dutch in the Dutch intervention in Caribbean development through the Dutch facilitation of the sugar revolution in the Caribbean. The second theme I want to deal with is the crucial role played by a remote island in the middle of the Atlantic, west of Mozambique, and many of you might not have heard of the island of St. Helena. So I want to talk today about a relatively unknown part of the history of migration to the Caribbean by focusing on the tremendous importance of that little known island of St. Helena. And then I want to cover the arrival in the Caribbean of mixed shiploads of Africans and Indians from the island of St. Helena. When we talk about slavery and African migration to the Americas, we talk about movement from Africa to the Caribbean. We don't ever talk about the fact that on the last 3 weeks of the voyage from India to the Caribbean, those last 3 weeks were ships that were shared. All right, well, I'll continue. I think I can speak loudly enough. Yes, I want to talk about the fact that on the last 3 weeks of the voyage from India to the Caribbean, the jahaj, the ships, picked up Africans who were deposited on the island of St. Helena. So I will talk a little bit about that. And then I will come to the 20th century, the most recent part of our history, where there is the coming together of the Caribbean trade union movement. And very significantly, the coming together of trade unionists from the British and the Dutch Caribbean to form the Caribbean Union of Trade Unions in 1938. So that generally summarizes what I have to say. So I will now go in a little bit of detail on the themes. The sugar revolution, which took place in the Caribbean, in the circum-Caribbean, let us say in the non-Spanish Caribbean. The sugar revolution took place in the middle of the 17th century. And what is the importance of the sugar revolution? The sugar revolution transforms the non-Spanish Caribbean from a large number of small products, cotton, ginger, blue, for making indigo and so on, for a large number of small, unprofitable acreages. And they were just struggling and invading each other all the time. The sugar revolution from the middle of the 17th century changes that scenario completely. From a large number of small holdings, the Caribbean is converted into a small number of large sugar holdings. And that is revolutionary. And who are the people who facilitated that sugar revolution in the Caribbean, which changes, as I said, forevermore the history of the Caribbean? Who are the progenitors? Who are the facilitators? The Dutch. Because the Dutch were in control of Brazil between 1624 and 1654, where they took control of the large area of northeastern Brazil. And in that large area of northeastern Brazil, the Brazilians had developed their model called the plantation model, with its hierarchy, with its control of slaves, with its socialization of slaves. A whole and entire model is created by the Portuguese in Brazil. And the Dutch, when they took control of Brazil from 1624 to 1654, they exported that entire plantation model to the Northern Caribbean. The islands of the Southern Caribbean, first of all, which is to the north of Brazil, to the northeast of Brazil. And from these islands of the Southern Caribbean, its transference to the north, to Belize, and to the rest of the circum-Caribbean area. So that the very early success of the sugar revolution and that very early, very profitable, multi-million-dollar operation can take place so rapidly because the rest of the Caribbean did not have to start from scratch. The Dutch gave them an entire workable model. And I think that's important. And that's a great tribute to to Dutch entrepreneurship. The Dutch were not sugar planters themselves. They were traders. But they not only transferred the plantation model, which the Spaniards in the north had, and they said, no, not in any way will we transfer this to the British and the French. That's our secret. The Dutch said, that's your secret, not our secret. And therefore the Dutch transferred that plantation model to the rest of the non-Hispanic Caribbean, and that is responsible for the immediate, the very quick, the enormous transformation of Caribbean economies from the Guyanas in continental South America right up into the rest of the French and the British Caribbean. So that's the first area that I wanted to cover. The other area, that I wanted to cover is the tremendous importance of the island of St. Helena. The island of St. Helena had a long history, captured by the Portuguese, then taken over by the Spaniards, then taken over by the Dutch, until finally it is taken over by the British and it becomes a British colony. In 1807, the British government passes a law abolishing all further trade in Africans. Not yet the abolition of the African slave trade or African slavery. We are talking about the abolition of transporting, buying and transporting Africans for sale in the Caribbean or in North America. In 1807, the British passed this law that there will be no further slave trading with Africans. But the Portuguese were still continuing to trade in Africans and sell them. The Spaniards were still doing that. The British, the Dutch, and the French now joined together after 1807 and established what they call anti-slavery commissions. And these anti-slavery commissions are located in different... Yeah, right, good. Thank you. Yeah, all right, I'll leave it here. These anti-slavery commissions are located in different parts of the Caribbean, and the purpose of the anti-slavery commissions was to prohibit the continuing transference of Africans into slavery. So there are three headquarters of the anti-slavery commissions: Cuba, Jamaica, and Suriname. So Suriname was one of the centers involved in the suppression of the slave trade. So these Africans who are being continuously transported after 1807, they are boarded by British or Dutch warships in the Atlantic, and their cargo of young African boys and girls, their cargo of would-be slaves, are seized. They are seized from these ships and then distributed widely, so that about 100,000 of these now freed Africans are brought to the Caribbean and settled in Suriname, in Trinidad, in what was then British Guyana, in Jamaica, and in the Bahamas. These are freed Africans. And how are these freed Africans rescued and kept? On the island of St. Helena. On the island of St. Helena. That's the station in which the free Africans are now temporarily housed. And as the ships are coming from India, so they leave Calcutta or they leave Madras with their shiploads, their first stop, the first refueling stop to get coals and so on for these coal-ridden ships, and to get meat and to get vegetables and to get fresh water, is St. Helena Island. And as the ships dock, these British Jahaj, they dock in St. Helena, they are told, do you have space on your ship? And quite often they had, because some people would have died, would have thrown themselves overboard and drowned and so on. And therefore these Indian indentured ships now take up Africans would have been slaves and bring them to the Caribbean. And that I think is important, because on the last leg of the journey, which is 3 weeks from St. Helena to the Caribbean, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, and that last 3 weeks, there are these Africans mixing with the Indians, eating an entirely Indian diet, but coming to know the Indians. And when they are brought to the Caribbean, they are similarly indentured along the Indians. So the Africans and Indians are now working together throughout the Caribbean. And I think that is something that we have to factor when we are talking about Afro-Indian relationships. And therefore, we should not have had the necessity of conflict between Africans and Indians in the Caribbean. So that is an important factor, I think, that we should put into our history. And Hazelwood Woolford and David Debedine call these people in their writings the black coolies. The black coolies, because they are African, but they are no coolies. So they are designated the black coolies who came to the Caribbean. And I think that it's important that we factor that into our whole concept of Caribbean nationhood. And then we come to the 20th century, in which there is the Great Depression that follows the First World War. So we are talking about late 20s into the 30s, when there is depression worldwide. And the result of that depression in the Caribbean is that there are widespread riots and disturbances by the working class, who can't manage on the small salaries, the little wherewithal that they have. And so there is revolutionary worker activity throughout the Caribbean, Suriname, Guyana, right up the Caribbean, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, right up to Belize. So it's a time of enormous industrial ferment. But you know, as William Shakespeare tells us, that sweet are the uses of adversity, which like a toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in its head. So I think we can make that analogy for the Caribbean. Out of that turmoil, out of that misfortune, the Caribbean trade union movement emerges. And I have documented it in the paper. I can't give you the details. But I think it is important that we should note that for the first time, trade unionists from Aruba, Curacao, Suriname joined with trade unionists from the rest of the British Caribbean to form the British Guyana and West Indian Labour Congress in British Guyana in 1938. And I think that coming together of the Pan-Caribbean trade union movement changes the history of the region forevermore. Because it is that trade union movement that for the first time is allowed to operate. The Europeans were continuously, for the last 100 years, preventing the formation of trade union movement because that did not serve their vested interests. Now, with the widespread disturbances throughout the Caribbean, Suriname, Guyana, the rest of the British and French Caribbean, forces the European plantocracy to recognize the trade union movement. They are moved only by that enormous threat of force, and therefore the trade union movement is founded at that time. And perhaps later on we could talk about that trade union movement. I've given you just a little skeletal details, but I deal with it at length in the paper. I want to make a special note about the tremendous contribution that the Chinese have made to Caribbean civilization. And in my own view as a Caribbean historian, my colleagues, other historians and so on, don't pay enough attention to the tremendous role that the Chinese played. And what is that? What is that? The European traders who came to the Caribbean, the British, the French, the Dutch traders, entrepreneurs, businessmen from Europe came to the Caribbean. They wanted to benefit from the sugar industry, but they would not go into the rural areas. The European entrepreneurs and the European businessmen set up their business in the capital cities: Kingston, Kingstown, Port of Spain, Georgetown. That is where the Europeans set up. But who was going to feed the hundreds of thousands of plantation workers who are not located in the urban centers? The sugar workers never lived in urban centers. The rice workers never in urban centers. They all went into the rural areas. And that's where the Chinese went. That's where the Chinese went. It is my own view that the plantation system would have collapsed without that Chinese support. So the Chinese went off into all the nooks and crannies in Martinique and Guadeloupe and Jamaica and Guyana and Suriname, where the Europeans dared not go for all kinds of reasons. And there the Chinese set up their shops. A liquor shop, which we call in the Caribbean a Chinese rum shop. And next to the rum shop, dry goods. You could get a whole range of dry goods. And from the 1880s, a lot of the products are imported from China. So that the Chinese role in the development of the plantation system and of the larger Caribbean is crucial. If you did not have these Chinese going in all through, the bushy areas and a Chinese shop, and I've cited some detailed information of that in my paper, the whole plantation system would have collapsed because the Europeans were not going into any one of these rural bushes to set up. The Chinese did. And that is a contribution that the rest of the Caribbean must note. We must document it far more than we have done it. When the oil industry started in Trinidad by a Chinese gentleman called John Lee Lum from Guangdong, came to Trinidad, he is the one who started the oil industry. And the oil industry, of course, made Trinidad rich and so on. He is the one who had the land. He's the one who had the capital. There was an Englishman who was an engineer. Rust was his name. And sadly, the whole history of Trinidad and Tobago always talks about Rust, the engineer, not the silly Chinese man, as I'm saying. Don't mention him. There's no place in Trinidad that is named after this pioneer of the oil industry. So Trinidad becomes wealthy as an oil-producing country from 1910, largely because of the initiative of this Chinese gentleman, John Lee Lum. And of course Trinidad became rich, and now Trinidad is exporting its oil technology to Guyana because we have so much of experience. But that experience is the first pioneering oil industry is started off by a Chinese gentleman, John Lee Lum, who sets Trinidad off on its oil journey. So I think this is something that we should bear in mind. We have to bear in mind also the importance of for the Indian population, the importance of what is called the Jahaji Bandal. Jahaji Bandal. Bandal is a Sanskrit word out of which we get the English word bundle. And the Indians were allowed from 1838, when they started coming to Guyana, right up to 1917, when Indian immigration, the travel of Indians to the Caribbean stopped, 1838 to 1917. The Indians were allowed to put that jahaji bundle, which is a very large triangular handkerchief. In India they call it a bara rumal, a very big handkerchief tied at the top. And in that jahaji bundle, they were able to bring an amazing variety of seeds, cuttings, small plants that really changed the whole geography of the Caribbean. So you see, that is another area on which I think we should do some more research. The jahaji bundle and the enormity of the transfers of seeds, cuttings, herbs, all the different kinds of dals that we eat, all the different kinds of bhaji that we eat, all the vegetables that we cook. All of these were brought, the seeds, the cuttings, the combs, brought in that jahaji bundle from India to the Caribbean. And that is something that I say, unfortunately, is not sufficiently recorded, and that I hope will be one of the themes that we'll be talking about in this conference. So I have, in fact, exceeded my time. I apologize to the chairman for that, but I think there were certain things that needed to be said, and I do hope that we'll have further discussion, much discussion on these themes that I have raised up in the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Brensley Sumaru. Very interesting indeed. And as you just mentioned, once a lifetime occasion that we must treasure. These are now the moments we have to treasure. Unfortunately, we have to close the formal opening session of this conference. I wish you all a fruitful deliberation in the coming days, and we also look forward to the conclusion of the conference and also the recommendation. Besides MC here, I'm also the director of the National Archives of Suriname, and especially Dr. Brensley Sumaru, I invite you to visit the National Archives of Suriname in the coming days, because we have very much information about the arrival of all the people here in the Caribbean. Thank you very much. And I think, looking at the program, we will now have a break, a 30-minute break for the coffee and tea break. Thank you very much, and good day to you.
Goedemorgen kijkers. U gaat het live gevolgd via Sunweb TV. We waren niet in staat om die live aan te kondigen. We worden ons gesloten zijn aan. Dit is op het Adekus. Het was de erfenis van slavernij en contractarbeid. Een evenement georganiseerd op Adekus door Intendured kracht. Hiermee zijn we dan aan het eind gekomen met deze live uitzending. Er is een break, dus we zullen deze live afstarten tot een volgende keer. Mijn naam is Adekus Congres. Zet eens aan elkaar.